Hello and welcome to the Importance of Staying Earnest, where we discuss the elements of taking on a career in the arts as a young person in the modern day. So, sit down, stand up, grab a tea or something stronger, and come with us on our journey to find some direction in our lives. My name is Harry, and with me is my fellow co-host and good friend, Emily.
Hello! In today's episode, we are talking about starting your own company, producing, being flexible with the times, and our radio play fault lines. So with us today is the Proxemics producer and my friend, Bria Cotton. Hi, Bria.
Hello, how are we both?
I'm good, thank you. How are you doing?
Yeah, man, doing all right. Happy to be here.
Good. Do you want to just say a little bit about who you are, what you do, both in terms of Proxemics and in general life?
And in general, yeah. So first and foremost, as you mentioned, I'm a producer with you, Emily, with Proxemics. Been with you for the last few months now, which has been really exciting. But outside of that realm, I'm just working a general worker's life in insurance as a risk analysis, reading risk analysis reports and whatnot, and outside of the workspace, because work can't be our entire lives. I'm just your standard reading fantasy nerd, kind of.
Not the first.
Not the first,
No.
not the last.
No. You and Harry will have a lot to talk about there, I'm sure. So, Bria, we went to university together, which was where we met.
Yeah.
And I was on a drama and English course, but you were on a history course.
Mm-hmm.
So I was wondering if you'd be up for talking a little bit about how you got into the theatre stuff and how we met and how all this came about, really.
All this came about indeed. Yeah. So I did a politics and history degree at university, and we were in the same year together, which I think potentially made things a bit easier.
Yeah.
And I only came into it around about second year when the Shakespeare Society at our uni put on The Tempest. And Tempest was one of my favourite plays, and I thought I'd give it a go and audition for it. I didn't get in, but I got a call back, and that was enough of a push for me to think, I can probably, take a swing at this for a couple more tries. Yeah, then got more involved on that end of it. I had a couple of friends who were already in Drama Soc and Musical Theatre Society, so I had a tangent relationship with the societies. But it didn't come to pass until I was fortunate enough to be cast in the Henriette, the Shakespeare Society's production they're taking up to Edinburgh Fringe. And yeah, that's how I met you. That's how I met a bunch of other people that I'm still really lucky to consider my friends and put me on this pathway, essentially. And yeah, that was essentially 6 very intense weeks of nothing but rehearsing, oftentimes nothing but drinking, and also just really taking full advantage of Edinburgh Fringe Fest and all the madness contained therein.
I feel like it was quite a good experience for us because a lot of sort of university and school productions, the structure is a really long rehearsal process because you're just rehearsing at the weekends, the odd evening kind of thing. Whereas because we were doing it in the summer break and in the run up to then go straight from rehearsals onto Edinburgh, it was a sort of proper I think we did have about 3 weeks rehearsal solid and then straight up to Edinburgh. So it was kind of done in a sort of more professional format, which was, I think, a really good experience.
Oh, 100%. Very intense process. To explain the project a bit more, just albeit briefly, it was a 3-part play that we were doing, each an hour-long slot. Everyone had different characters, different roles that were vastly different from each other across the 3 different plays, because we were doing Richard II, Henry IV, Part 1, Henry V. So you had everybody was going into essentially putting on different hats and trying to navigate that in such a way that one play wasn't left out the side or one play wasn't stronger than the others. It was a really interesting experiment in my mind in seeing just how to balance these different priorities in such a way that, okay, this person is kind of the main character in this play, but they're not in the other play. How do we make sure we're not wasting their time?
It was quite a nice way to make it quite a sort of level playing field, actually, wasn't it? Because it wasn't okay, here are the leads over here, and then here's the ensemble, because you might be ensemble in one play and then be a lead in another, and it was quite a nice way to sort of make it really balanced.
Has it influenced how you attack projects going forward, having had that kind of maybe either aiming not to hit that because you've been through it, or aiming or being more flexible because you've been through something like that?
Let's see, because this is the first project where I've actually been at the creative side of it. I've only really been in the acting side of things up until this point. So it's definitely more in the sense of okay, well, how can me, the actor, make this an easier experience for the director and creative team, so it's not like stress inducing. I'm not sure how you found it, Tandy, because after this, you went on to do a lot more directing on your side.
I think, to be honest, I think the main things I liked about that experience was is this the right word? Egalitarian sort of atmosphere that it created, of that everyone was on a very equal sort of playing field. Everyone had an equal role to play to sort of pull this out the bag.
That is the right word.
Thank you. I thought it was, but when you have a moment of doubt. It was a big word. I struggle. And I really like that in terms of directing. You often hear the sort of phrase of like, oh, there's no small parts, only small actors, which I think is a bit too harsh. But I think whenever you're creating something, every single person who is there has a vital role to play.
Absolutely.
And if they don't, then why are they there in the first place? Even if it is just to, make suggestions about something or to provide a second opinion.
Yeah.
And so, and I think I really do take that into my directing. I don't like to think of my directing as just me going, okay, this is exactly how I want it done. You do this, you do this, you do this, you do this. Of course, there are elements of that, and I try and shape it around how I see it. But in my mind, if I'm going in and just literally saying, okay, this is exactly how you're saying this line, and you're going to walk from here to there, pick this up, then walk over here and say this line exactly in this way. Well, I might as well just do a one-man show, because
Yeah.
why have I got all these other creative, brilliant people in the room? And I like that flexibility. I like that sense of play and bouncing ideas off one another, and then sort of using my role as a director to basically funnel all of those ideas into one overall cohesive sort of vision, for want of a better word. And yeah, for me, that's how I like to work and operate. And I guess experiences like that have sort of fed into that idea.
So what made you jump to producing then, Bria? If you said that if Fault Lines is your first kind of full creative role, what made you go, you know what, I'm going to try producing because I imagine you've approached it in a manner that's not just, I'm just doing this job and produces the name on it of it. You've come at it from this is my role and how I'm going to attack it. What made you think, yep, this is a direction I'd like to go, as opposed to co-direction or a more niche creative role?
Ooh, yeah. Okay. So I've always thought of myself less as the creative type and more as organizational type. So in terms of producing or like organizing and trying to be more on like the other side of things, before lockdown hit and during like the second semester of uni, I was a producer for like the Medics Review, which is kind of like a comedy sketch show that medics do, which I was producing, which is a whole side story that we shan't get into, but and that essentially involved like either writing sketches or like helping people create sketches, collating it all together into one performance, organizing rehearsal time, spaces, props, what have you. Basically being like the driving force behind this thing, in that you have this entire group of people who all want to make each other laugh, who are all good mates, and you want to try and push them into a way that's like, okay, but let's create something good here. So that was a really interesting challenge until like COVID made sure did us in with that one. But in coming into Fault Lines, I was really excited to be offered this opportunity by Tandy, in that I wanted to see, well, what else can be offered in the creative team space as a producer, besides just I just punch the numbers or like sent emails out to people. Like, how do you get involved creatively in that sense? Because I feel like producers are often relegated to just being like the admin desk jockeys rather than actual creative input.
From my perspective, I remember, because I'd known since I left uni that I wanted to start my own company. And I also knew that it was the sort of venture that, while I was prepared to do it on my own, I would prefer to do it with people. One of the reasons I work in theatre is because I like working as part of a team and with people. And from working with you before, Bria, and like knowing you as a friend, like, I just think you're brilliant. And I remember just one day thinking, like, who would I really like to do all of this with? And I was just like, Bria would be perfect. like not only are you like creative and conscientious with both your approach to other people and to your work, but like you're also like you're committed and you're a hard worker. I also knew that you were the sort of person who, if you're unsure of something, you would do the research and find out what needed to happen and
absolutely
do it. And like I also didn't necessarily say, oh, Bria, come and produce Fault Lines. It was do you want to be the producer for Proxemics, which, because it's a new company, is like that's got a whole sort of realm of creativity around it in itself, because it's sort of, well, me and you are shaping not just this one project but a whole company.
Yeah, like there's a lot of flexibility awarded in that. Like I wouldn't have imagined, I think it was late August, you approached me with joining as producer. I thought, oh yeah, and then we're gonna do a radio play and then a stage play. I thought it was more just like, let's try and figure this out together, what we want this to be and how we're going to navigate like this very, very uncertain timeline that we're in. So that's what I really enjoyed being a producer, is having that creative freedom to take it to where I want to go. Like, what do I want to highlight? What do I want to bring into the world, essentially? And being able to work on Fault Lines and the future projects we have lining up, it's a very privileged position to find myself in, that I'm very grateful for.
We sort of mentioned that when we started this, we didn't know we were doing a radio play and then a play, and it was also in COVID times, and we really didn't know what was going on. I wonder if you'd be happy to chat a little bit about sort of the process we went through of finding that initial starting material for us to go off that became Fault Lines and the other things we've got lined up.
Yes, of course. So let's see. So it was around August that we kind of came together in this holy union of ours. And I believe we both of us decided that we're going to have the dual track approach, in that we're going to send out a call out to everywhere that we know in terms of like groups, online spaces, that kind of thing, for a script call out, and that people from whatever like area, from whatever place they are, doesn't matter if they're like a seasoned script writer or this is their first play, they can just send it in to us. We'll read it through and we'll decide whether or not we will put that on, because it was originally going to be like just straight in-person theater production, because again, didn't know where we were going to be, so we're trying to be as flexible as possible in that sense.
The naivety we had summer 2020.
Oh man.
Times have changed.
Tell me about it. So as it kind of, and we had, I remember how big of a gap we left between that. I think we had like roughly like a month and a half, something like that, for people.
Yeah, I think we left it quite long, because I remember we discussed sort of, we didn't want it to be a case of, well, we only want this open to people that have got a finalised product ready to submit at the time we put the call out. So it's sort of, we wanted to give, I think it was sort of just over a month, maybe about 5 weeks or so that we had the call out for.
Yeah, because that was enough time for like people to be like, oh yeah, this is the push I need to like actually write something, or like, oh, I had this half-baked idea, this is time for me to flesh it out, and so on. And and I gotta say, reading through the scripts, even though some of them weren't what we were looking for or weren't fully fleshed out ideas, it was still very exciting to read what ideas people want to see on screen, or not on screen, on stage, and see what they want to see like put out into the world, like what themes kind of kept on cropping up, like whether it became like issues related to political issues, relationships. So there were even some scripts pertaining to like the lockdown and how like these characters they created dealt with that. So as it kind of came down to it, there was this fear that we had of like, God Almighty, what if we just don't like the scripts that were sent in? What if we found ourselves in that position? Because the last thing we wanted to do was to attach ourselves to a project that we had no love for. So I remember us looking into different scripts that wouldn't be too expensive to put on, because new company, no money. So I think us being potentially excited by projects such as like Oscar Wilde plays, like more 19th century, early 20th century plays that were out of copyright and could be put on without us having to like hand over our souls for it, and also other plays as well that we kind of come across that would have been inexpensive to do, but with not like a stupidly big cast. Because I think I remember us talking about this, like even though our Henriette experience was great, it was a cast of 20 of us, from memory, And we both thought to ourselves, that's an insane number to try and wrangle as a new company. So we're just going to try and keep the cap at like five cast members, I believe, something like that.
Yeah, and then ironically, Fault Lines that we went for has a far larger cast than that.
Yeah. And then, yeah. God, yeah, you're right. And then, God. And then thankfully, the two scripts that we went down for, Fault Lines and Are We Nearly There Yet, written by Megan Phoenix for Fault Lines, and Jerusha for Are We Nearly There Yet. These are both scripts that both had elements that we really enjoyed. Like Fault Lines that we chose, originally we kind of thought, yeah, I guess we could do this as a theater play, or maybe we can toss up one to the other. And it was you, Tandy, that came up with the idea of why not do both? Do Fault Line as a radio play, because we have no idea when we're going to be allowed back into theaters again, and waiting too long will probably just fizzle out. We won't have the drive to do this anymore. Like, put on Are We Nearly There Yet in potentially like late summer, early autumn 2021, when hopefully theaters are back open again. And I think that's when it kind of sunk in. I was going to enjoy working this project with you, because you were able to think on your feet in that manner and say, well, if we can't put this on stage, why not do it as a radio play? Because you got the idea from that, due to how much the conversations happened via radio calls and phoning into each other. And I thought, this could actually work in our favor.
I remember I also got that because so I read quite a few scripts while I was at uni, because I was in the Drama Society committee, and we would have like seasons of plays, and people would submit scripts to us for us to read through and choose a season basically to put on. So I've read quite a lot of scripts in terms of looking at it analytically for putting it on. And I remember ages and ages ago, I can't even remember what the script was now, but we read this play, and a lot of us had we were sat around discussing it, and we were kind of going like, we really enjoyed it, but we can't put our finger on it as to why. Like, I really enjoyed reading the story, but why is it I don't feel excited about putting it on as a play? And someone else in the team just chimed in saying, it's because it's a radio play. There's nothing in here that warrants necessarily staging. Like, there's great words, great story, but there's nothing in here that is necessarily sort of visual. And while I wouldn't go as far as to say that was the case for Fault Lines, like I think I'd be really interested to see if Magnum
100%.
does put it on for stage one day. I'd love to see it. But it's since then, whenever I've sort of been reading through scripts, I've always sort of had in the back of my mind, is this a stage play or is this a radio play or something else entirely? And so, yeah, so thank you to, I think it was Chloe who said that, so thanks, Chloe.
It seems to me that there's a number of, so the difference that comes between is in the problems to solve, right? Starting a new company, as far as I can tell from the outside, is that it's basically, hey, I'm going to run headfirst into about 1,000 problems, half of which I'm barely qualified to solve, but I'm going to attempt to solve them anyway. So I think, because this is I've never started a company, but I've had ideas for numerous projects that get bogged down by the kind of, approaching people. Because as you said, Emily, it's very hard to make theatre, to make anything really, without kind of collaborative help.
Yeah.
And so, but it's also not particularly easy to try and put things on as a duo, right? Wow. So, as two people who have you ever started a business before this one?
No.
What was that process like? What did that look like in terms of did you find it being like, oh wow, I thought this was going to be more of a problem than it is, or how many times have you gone, this was a mistake? Like,
I think I don't know about you, Tan, but I think the only moment of minor crisis I had was when we had anything in that sparks that feeling of, yeah, this is what I want to do. I definitely remember thinking, had anything in that sparks that feeling of, yeah, this is what I want to do. I definitely remember thinking, we're really excited to put on plays sent in to us. We're really excited to see what we're looking for, and we hope to shine a spotlight on up and coming writers, and then to turn around to produce a play that we chose. I think in terms of the business side, Harry, and more response to your question, there's always in the back of my head of, oh, like, we're trying to make money off this in a sense, in a way that's going to keep this thing sustaining. Because I'm sure Tanya, you can probably speak to this. I can imagine as a director and working in like student projects, money was a major issue because you had to pay like people for props, you had to pay people for like stage and set design. Whereas now it's all like, hell, we gotta pay these people who have so kindly like signed up for this, and you hope that at the end of the day the people buy into this product and they enjoy it and they tell their friends and whatnot, and you properly reward people for their labor. Because if this isn't obvious already, I'm very much on like the left wing side of things, and I'm very conscious of the fact of the issue of like free labor in the creative art industry, and unpaid and underpaid is something that it kind of thrives off, and not wanting to be part of that problem. And
it's funny how all of a sudden you end up being like, oh, I don't want to. Why should I have to pay the man for this? To all of a sudden being like, wow, I really have to pay the people who I want to pay now.
Yeah.
It's kind of a weird conglomeration of, you don't want to be in a position where you're, acting as if you're elite and all of a sudden you've got all the money to do what you want, and that's fine. But similarly, you do also want to, you want that trickle down of like, we've created something with a number of people who are deserving of reward for that, and being so early in the situation, you can't pay out where you want to pay.
Yeah, and actually, I completely agree with everything you said there, Bria. I think for me, the same real panic moment was, I think I've had a couple more along the way, because I set up Proxemics initially sort of just on my own during the lockdown, and used it as a vessel to just do a couple of projects that I've been working on, like really small little video type things. But then I brought Bria on when I knew that, okay, no, I actually want to do this, and I want to make this into a business, and I want to create some stuff that's, more than just a couple of, small videos. And yeah, that moment when we were near the end of the script call out and we just hadn't found something that we were excited about. Like, there was some really good stuff in there, but Bria mentioned there was one that was a set sort of like during lockdown. We kind of decided that we didn't really want to go along that track, at least just now, and and we really wanted to do some new writing. We're like, that we're a new company, we want to do new exciting things. Like, there's plenty of merit to putting on like an Oscar Wilde play or whatever, but that wasn't what we set out to do, and that wasn't what we wanted to do. And we would have done it if it was in aid of sort of showing, oh look, we can pull this out the bag and we can make something that's good, to hopefully get enough trust and build up the brand a bit more in order to perhaps get those scripts in for next time.
Yeah.
But that was a real sticking point. And then in terms of the sort of financial side, in a way, doing Fault Lines as a radio play has actually been a bit of a lifesaver, because out of sort of the things we were forced to do, such as recording, remotely, separately, while we managed to, both me and Bria made sure that we got microphones to everyone. A lot of people that we had on already had decent setups, but we made sure for those who didn't that we got microphones and such to them. And so, yes, that it's not recorded in a studio, so there might be marginal differences in terms of acoustic and such in the recordings, which, we've worked hard to keep to a minimum. It's meant that we've not had to pay for space. We've not had to pay for rehearsal space. We've not had to pay for a venue. And we've essentially cut a lot of costs, which has allowed us to do something with a larger cast, because I think both of us knew from the off we were absolutely not going to say to people, we expect you to do this for free, even if it is a minimal fee in the first instance. And that we're also not doing something that we're just going, okay, so we're going to make a massive profit out of it ourselves. The only thing that we're trying to do at the moment is to pay people for the work that they've done, and to get enough money in order to support the next thing that we do, which we'll all have to apply for funding and such for anyway. So yeah, Fault Lines was a bit of a lifesaver in that sense.
What's it been like trying to convert to a radio play? Like, I know we've actually had numerous discussions, but the idea of both of you come from a theatre perspective, right? So translating, especially directorially, I don't really know much about producing. It's kind of one of those weird areas where I'm like, what do they do? But I know they do things. That's not disparaging producers. I know they do things. I just don't know what they do.
No, of course.
Did you throw things out the window? Did you try things that work in theatre that you found didn't work in a radio play?
Yeah, so I'm thinking back to when we were talking about how the producer, as my role, will fit into this as a radio play. And I remember, Tanda, you were saying how you didn't want this to be a thing where the producer only shows up for like 2 rehearsals and then leaves, and then like no one has any idea who they are. So I think my role during the radio play recording sessions was more just troubleshooting more than anything else. Like, I occasionally offered my own creative input of like, oh, maybe we would tweak that, or offer support for you Tandy, when you had to like cover a couple of things. I remember doing like tech support a couple of times.
Yeah, that was invaluable, I must admit.
And I think I found myself more enjoying like the organizational aspects of it. So trying to balance social media, trying to think about like the future of the project, like trying to think 3 weeks ahead of all, like, okay, well, if this doesn't work out to plan, how are we going to like account for this issue, and how do we make sure that the cast enjoys themselves as well, and making sure that they feel completely like comfortable with us. Like, that's how I felt my role was in the radio play, which is potentially similar to how it works in a more theater sense, but
maybe less of the tech
support. Maybe less of the techie side. No, we outsourced that to elsewhere. But yeah, no, I think I enjoyed how involved I was in this project. I've known some cases where like the director and the assistant director gets all of like the attention and whatnot. They're more well known. Their names seem to be more splashed across like the pamphlets, and the producer's name seems to be relegated to like 3rd place. So that's the impression that I get anyway. So it's nice to be involved in the project in such a way it feels like a 2-header rather than like Teddy, and I guess Bria was there as well.
Because I haven't listened to a lot of radio plays, and it's not the most common done thing amongst us youthful folk. So did you have to like take the turn and go, I'm going to listen to like 100 radio plays to get some idea of what we're doing? Have I put you on the spot?
No, no. To be quite honest, not really. I've listened to a couple of like snippets of radio plays. Like, there's been like audio like adaptions of them. So for example, Neil Gaiman's and Terry Pratchett's Good Omens was adapted to a radio play by the BBC. And that's an interesting project because like it's fantasy. It has angels, demons, the apocalypse. Like, how do you make that a realistic soundscape rather than just like a slightly more fancy audiobook? But no, I actually found more inspiration from podcasts that I listened to. So a couple of podcasts that I listened to, Time to Say Goodbye, The Adventure Zone, Critical Role, and a couple of others as well. Quite a few of them involve them recording remotely or trying to develop a storyline that is a bit improvised. No one's really sure how it goes. There's a lot of like dialogue that happens outside of like the recording space to be all like, okay, what do we want from this session? Like, how do we make it as fulfilling to us as possible? So reading like interviews on how they created their podcasts and how they have like dealt with recording issues. So like Time to Say Goodbye.
I'm glad to have found a fellow Critical Role fan.
Hey, I just got into it because like during this time as well, I've been thankful to now like join my first like D&D group, and like the DM, who is very, very good, takes a lot of inspiration from Matt Mercer's side of things. So yeah.
I think we all do.
Yeah, who doesn't? But I
Me? I don't play D&D.
You're missing out.
To be fair, I think I'd love it. For a long time, I kind of thought I would really
adore
enjoy
D&D.
it. I'm just
you would adore it. You'd be good at it as well.
It's I think you'd have a blast with it.
Yeah. The only other thing I really wondered if you'd be up for chatting about, Bria, is so obviously you've done a degree and a master's.
Yeah.
And I was just wondering if you, would like to just say a little bit about what you did for that. But also, obviously, it's very different to doing theatre and the others, like, passions that you have and, like, the creative things you love doing, like D&D, I suppose. And I was just wondering if the two ever inform one another.
Oh God, yes, 100%. So, so as I mentioned earlier, I did my degree, my bachelor's degree, in politics and modern history, and I did my master's in international relations. And one of the more interesting aspects of that degree that I had like the privilege to study under is that there's a growing interest in cultural history and cultural artifacts and how they play into history, politics, how they constitute each other in international relations. A large part of that is, like obviously films and television, how they play into each other, how they constitute and make sense of historical past, presents, and futures. So like the big one is like Vietnam War films from the U.S. during like from the 70s to the 90s, and how they essentially turned the narrative around from one being of loss and demasculinization to one of like triumph, one of like, imperialist expansion, how the focus turned away from the devastation wrought on the Vietnamese and Cambodian and Laos people to one of like the destruction wrought on American veterans by their own government. And looking into that like during second year was very interesting in terms of like looking at how films can constitute history in their own ways. But in terms of theater, that in of itself, I'd say is just becoming into its own as its own field in historical and politics studies. So one thing that comes to mind is in second year we took a unit called the Cultural History of Modern War, wherein during that semester we looked at various means of like how is war expressed in these mediums, so like music, television, got like Marvel comic books during the 50s and 60s and how they constituted their own understandings of history, like like Captain America punching Hitler on its first edition cover and whatnot. And I remember one in terms of theater, how German prisoners of wars in World War One, I believe in the Allied camps, a popular pastime was essentially drag performances. So within that, within like these dire conditions, you have this growing theater space of how they try to entertain themselves, and there's also like stories of how British soldiers like put on pantos during like during their own like in the trenches during this period as well. And that was always very interesting to me, because how do you use theater in its own right, in its own very visceral, very often intense medium to regale these stories in such a way that they feel timeless, but not they feel timeless, but also very rooted in the historical period they're alluding to. So a more concrete example is so for my master's, I took a course called Critical Military Studies. And that's a fascinating course because it looks into the role of the military in everyday life. So from how egg cartons were advertising like historic military propaganda posters to try and like encourage people to donate to various charities that support the veterans, to looking at how like why is it that at various Super Bowl games in the States you have like B-2 bombers fly over the stadium as a means of like getting the fans like up and ready for the big game. And one of the projects we had to do for that was choose an artifact or something that involved the military. So that could be a museum piece, that could be a piece of military technology, or even something as simple as like a pair of like camouflage trousers they can buy at H&M, and then write like 1,000 words as to why that piece is important for studying military history. And I chose Shakespeare's Henry V, and which was yeah. So that was a lot of fun to do.
Nerds engaged there.
Yeah. Yes. And that was a joy to do, because looking at how Henry V has shifted and shapeshifted in different ways in history. So, for example, how it was a very popular film adaptation during World War II. Oh God, who's it directed by? I want to say Orson Welles, but that's probably someone entirely different, or some other, or no, Laurence Olivier's Henry V's film adaptation, where the opening section openly like stated like this is dedicated to air brigades and foot soldiers who are about to engage on the invasion of about to get to the invasion of Normandy, you then immediately brought it forward to what was then the present into making it, this is an uplifting war movie about a bunch of soldiers trying to commit the impossible. Like, you can't, like, when you think of Henry V, you think of the very speeches he writes about and talks about to his soldiers before they go out and engage in their wars with France, and how they're very rousing, very inspirational speeches. But you then contrast that to I believe it's the Royal Shakespeare Company's production in 2003, which is when Britain entered the Iraq War with the United States. And what they did with that one was that they kind of based Henry V, and while they went toward France, all based around the Dodgy dossier. So, trying to be all like, well, they entered this war for completely the wrong reasons. They were lied to by the government. Henry V's various, like, Harfleur and other speeches as well would normally in other meetings to be met with, like, rigor and cheering and shouting and, like, triumphant music. They are instead met with, like, the various, like, company men just going, oh, God, no, not this again. Like, why are we here? Very dismissive.
That's really cool.
Yeah, and absolutely incredible, because it's also well known and being deployed in Band of Brothers, HBO's adaptation of Stephen Ambrose's book that came out, directed by Tom Hanks. And yeah, that's where I found it mostly converged, and just thinking mostly just thinking about what's the point of theater during in relating to these issues.
I think there's a question of art in there as well. I think, what was the most 100%. Recent thing that was like pointless jobs? Do you remember that pointless jobs thing that was going around?
Yeah, I remember that.
Like artists was like the top of the pointless jobs thing, and I think it's what you've just basically described there is exactly the rebuttal to that, which is like, you know, it's without commentary, without, you know, everything you've just mentioned there is everything from being in a prisoner of war camp, the trenches of war, rousing for war, and in contrast to war. In contrast to? Is that the right phrase? You know what I mean?
Or like in objection to.
And it's like, remove that. Like, you kind of... What do you lose from removing that? It's like, wow, we'd live in a hellhole of a world if we had to remove that.
Like, I see art and theater and all those various like incarnations as a way of making sense of the world to ourselves. And which is what
it's conversations that are difficult to have.
Exactly.
Well, I mean, and that's how theatre
right?
started. You know, as far as our records go, like if you go back to ancient Greece and like the Festival of Dionysus and all that sort of stuff, and it's a festival to inform people, particularly when people were illiterate. That's how you can convey messages and try and explain how things happened and explain a morality that wanted to be expressed by governments and people in positions of power.
Oh, 100%. You know, like conglomerates and businesses as like product pushers.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's a very rewarding experience when you go into it. But also to circle back to your point, Harry, about pointless jobs. Like, one of the most interesting things as someone who majored in history is to see and hear how many people thought it's a pointless degree. And because, to bring up the hellscape that is UOM Love, which is like our university's meme chat, I swear to God, the two most reviled degrees on that hellscape from, you know, like STEM and business people were like history and drama degrees, because they just couldn't wrap their heads around the idea of doing a degree that doesn't immediately lend itself to profit. Like, obviously, you can turn it into like, oh, I'm going to start my own theater company, or I'm going to produce something.
Right, and the funny thing is you turn to them and say, okay, don't watch a movie ever again.
Exactly, yeah. Or, yeah, and like with history degrees and seeing just how like no one seems to know about like imperial history in that sense. No one seems to care about it, like in the more mainstream sense. And so bringing history and art together is a very, very important conjunction, because it brings history and art to the people. So like you just need to look at how popular like Horrible Histories is for like TV, how popular Six the Musical is as well, and like showing Tudor history in a different light, and renewing that interest.
It's a way to make history not feel so removed, I think.
Exactly.
You know, if you can physically see these sort of figures in front of you, of course you're aware that it's an actor in a costume and everything, but if you're seeing this sort of flesh and blood in front of you, telling you these things that happen and these stories and such. It feels far more real than for a lot of people than just reading it in a history book, and less alienating.
Exactly, yeah. Like, history doesn't solely exist in the past, like, or like in a stagnant like book that you read. History exists in the people that make up for it and live with it. And theater
100%.
is one of the best spaces to show that. Like, for example, like, various museums are now very intrigued to bring performance art into their own spaces to try and say, well, how do we use this space that we have, rather than just showing, oh, these are just some very nice objects we have from 100 years ago, to like, well, these aren't just objects that are very nice and pretty. They were used and held by people. They were admired by the people of the past. So how do we use...
It's the human side
Yeah,
of it.
exactly, yeah.
And I think being able to put yourself in that space, right? The phenomenology of, wow, like what we're experiencing here, right? Looking through my own eyes and doing all this kind of stuff. That was done 100 years ago, right? Henry VIII was a bloke who existed. He moved. He existed in and of himself. And it's kind of like that gap is really hard to bridge, really hard. And I think I couldn't agree with you more in that art and theatre and performance, all that kind of stuff is at least a stepping stone on bridging that gap until, I don't know, time machines, I guess.
Yeah. yeah, because there's
Go
so
on then,
many...
STEM guys. That's where you can come in.
Hey.
Yeah, come on, STEM, step it up.
Get us a time machine.
What are your degrees actually
Pointless
good for?
jobs.
We do it on stage, but with flashing lights and fun songs.
Yeah. So
Oh, man.
that's definitely my joint description of how you can use theater to both protest and support these various histories that we find ourselves swayed by, and trying to bring together these communities in such a way that it feels like a shared history rather than just something you can like indulge in or just like watch with detachment.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's fantastic.
Before we let you go, we like to give everyone 30 seconds to plug whatever they want. So it can be you, where people can find you, where people can find the stuff that you're up to. I'm going to set a 30-second timer.
Very nice.
Are you ready?
Yes.
Okay, go.
First of all, you can find whatever I'm up to and Towndy as well at Proxemics. You can find our website at proxemics.co.uk. Find us on Facebook. Our upcoming project is Fault Lines. That's coming out very soon. We hope you all enjoy it. And besides that, you can't really find me anywhere else. I'm more or less a ghost on social media. I just encourage you all to read as much as possible, especially in terms of non-Western fantasy, and encourage yourselves to read more, watch more, and take more notice of the world outside of your limits.
Advice plug. We haven't had one of them before.
Yeah, love that. Honestly, thank you so much for chatting about all sorts in the end today. Who knew
we've
we'd
covered
go
good
from
ground today.
That was quite the spectrum. But as always, you're fascinating to talk to.
Thank you.
And yeah, thank you very much for, well, A, talking to us, and B, being my business partner.
Yeah, thank you for having me on. Thank you for having me on as well. And yeah, it's an endless joy to be working with you, Tandy. I'm excited to see where we go next.
There are 100 different things that we discussed there that we could spend a whole nother hour analysing and discussing. The history and theatre and the place of it all is thoroughly interesting. But I think, for the sake of love for the project, I think we should just chat a bit about Fault Lines, just to end off.
Go on, if I must.
I know.
Well, actually, one thing we didn't mention on the podcast is that you're in it. I
am. And now I have to be all nice and fluffy and withhold all my criticisms.
Oh, wow, thanks.
No, Fault Lines, from a perspective of someone who was directed in it, and having asked a bunch of questions, obviously, to the both of you about what it was like to make it, it's honestly just the fact that it's out there and doing a project. I remember the first meeting we had, like the first rehearsal, quote unquote, thing that we did, and every other was like, "Oh, how's everyone feeling?" It's like, I'm really, really glad just to be doing something. And I think,
honestly, it was really strange, because it was quite a long process, really. I mean, I think we selected to do the play and had our first meeting with Magnum in maybe
Hell of a name, by the way.
November 2020, maybe even October. And it's now coming out on the 23rd of April 2021.
Yeah, it's projects,
and we've been working on it pretty much solidly in that time.
I mean, to be fair, from first recording session through to now it being released in a couple of weeks or next week, it's a really impressive turnaround time in terms of actual, if you ignore pre-production, like through from production to post-production, it's, I haven't
I'm exhausted.
heard it, but it's an impressive amount of work, and I think there's something to be said. And, we've made discussions across, various episodes of this podcast, currently released and not, about getting out there and doing things, and how, especially right now, not so much right this second because things seem to be lifting, but we'll see, how hard it has been to do things, and having to solve that problem has been, and you've solved it at least somewhat. You've made something in the pandemic, right? Which
and
is
I am. So obviously you've not heard it yet. In fact,
no, I have
as
not.
we're recording this, it's not completely done. It's going to be a long couple of weeks, in a good way. But from, obviously a lot of it is now completed, and I'm genuinely really proud of what we've created, especially when you consider, like, just full stop, I'm proud of how it's sounding.
Yeah.
And then when you factor in that most of us don't really have experience in doing work in this way, even those people involved in the project that have done more things of an audio medium before, they've always been able to be in the same room as other people, never mind having to do everything like over Zoom, Discord or whatever. So yeah, when you factor in that as well, I mean, I'm so proud of what we've managed to do, and of everyone involved, really. And it's such a lovely group of people, and I really hope that soon we can all meet up and grab a drink in a beer garden somewhere.
The fact that you kept technical difficulties to as minimum as you did, genuinely quite impressive.
Thanks.
Because imagine, right? You've offered, how big was the cast? We mentioned there was
8.
a big cast. It's 8 people. It's like 8 problems you got to solve right there. Like 8 people who's like, you need to record this, and it needs to have as fewer issues as possible. And that's over a period of like a couple of months. So the fact that you have an end product that only, I think, how many times did you do any re-records, reshoots?
No. Well, so each recording session we would record the scene at least twice, if not 3 times, and then we'd do pickups. So as we were recording, I would have the script in front of me, and I would literally star lines if I wasn't happy with them on each pass we did. And then if on like the second or third pass, one of the lines I'd starred in the first instance, if I was then happy with it, I'd sort of tick that off. And then at the end of all the passes, if there were any lines that still had stars next to them, or I would also open it up to the actors as well, like, oh, is there anything you felt you wanted to have another stab at? We would then do pickups of just that line or lines. So that's kind of saved us from having to do any major...
Impressive time saver. Because, any kind of project you'd expect to be like, oh, we've set it out for this amount of time, but it's taken 3 times as long. I know with theatre you don't really get that chance, right? Where you're like, well, something's going to be on stage. So being able to compress that is...
I think coming from that background in a way is that's how I've given myself this routine. Grueling timeline, because I realise it's the sort of thing I'm not used to, having the luxury of crafting the final project to the same, because when you have finished directing a piece of theatre, I can't control what the actors are going to do when they actually go out on stage when there's an audience there.
Yeah, you don't have your hand, you're not the puppet master then, are you?
Well, I don't like to think of my puppet master anyway, but thanks, Harry.
That's what
Sure.
Right?
No. But anyway, that's a whole other conversation.
It is. Shameless
and so
plug.
I
You
knew
have
that
30
I
seconds.
could be looking over this, listening to this footage over and over and over, and just making tweak after tweak. And so I just in the end gave myself a deadline and said, this is when it's coming out. If I have to pull all-nighters for the 2 weeks running up to it, I will. Hopefully I won't have to, and I don't think I will have to.
It's good practice, man. Deadlines are important.
They are. Otherwise I will just eternally faff.
Right? Coming to your ears in 2052 or whatever.
Fault lines.
Fault lines, this thing that happened ages ago.
Yeah.
So, do you want to
yes, I can
plug away? Shameless
give
plug?
the very shameless
Give the deets.
plug of
I'll
the
sit back
details.
and let you roll out.
Yes. So, obviously, I don't know when you're listening to this. So if it's in the future and it's already been and gone, sorry. But if it's not, Fault Lines is available between the 23rd of April 2021 and the end of May 2021. Tickets are available on proxemics.co.uk, our website. If you go to any of our Proxemic social medias, there's also links through on there. Early bird tickets are available until and inclusive of the 22nd of April. So if you want to save a buck, go grab them then. And yeah, honestly, just if you fancy supporting us, whether it's because you enjoy this podcast and you want to support us as people in our own endeavours, or if you just like the sound of the project, or both, hopefully both, genuinely, it would mean the world if you would go and get a ticket. You can listen to it as many times as you like in between that time frame. I genuinely really like the story. Otherwise, we wouldn't have done it in the first place. I think it's a great story. It's a nice bit of escapism, and it's something you can enjoy without staring at a screen after staring at a screen all day whilst working from home. So, yeah. Thank you. Did I do that okay, Harry?
I think so. I think you
Thanks.
did all right. Thank you for listening to The Importance of Staying Earnest. If you want to keep up with us outside the podcast, you can follow us on Twitter and Instagram at TIOSE_podcast or on Facebook at The Importance of Staying Earnest podcast. If you would like to reach out to us, you can find us at tiose.podcast@gmail.com. Please drop us a review if you enjoyed, and we'll see you next time.